Hey everyone, good evening. How are you all doing? It's time for another live stream. It's late where I am. It's cold. I've got a nice little heater, space heater beside me because it's um I'm not a winter person, let's just put it that way. It's not even really cold. There's places that get much lower temperature than we ever get here. The Netherlands is always wet and cold, but never freezing. But we're here. We've got space heater, got something nice and warm, and I hope that you do too. Because tonight we're going to talk about a conversation that is difficult to have for a lot of people. It's an incredibly laden topic. There's a lot of things to do about it, and there should be more than ever. The world, we as people, become aware of discrimination, of the things we do that discriminate between different people, how we deal with people who are different from ourselves. And as it turns out, despite all the progress that we have made as a society, there's a lot still to be won, because there's a lot that is still not going the way that we often feel it should. And the ironic thing is that the people who want to go back to segregation, and we're not talking about just race discrimination here, or just gender, or just sexuality, all kinds of discrimination, any kind of separation that we make between people who are different than us, in any which way is possible. That is, we'll get into that a bit more later on, but across the board, on both sides of the argument, whichever argument that is, the people who want to go back to segregation, who want to go back to a place where it's okay to call people out for being different and to treat them differently than you would if it was someone who's like you. They want to go back to that. These are the people who are working very hard to go back to that image, to that ideal, that world. And on the other side of the argument is the people who want to be more inclusive, and they are very vocal about discrimination, especially about stopping it, about propagating is perhaps the wrong word, but to help equality along, to help people treat each other as equals, as human, before anything else that sets us apart from one another. And both discussions are very heated. And it's important that we have these discussions. And in between the moral discussion that is going on here, because essentially this is a discussion of morality, of what do you find more important, where are your values? But in between that, there is also our basic human psychology, and how the things that we experience in our lives, and the way that we are simply wired as creatures, as the animals we are, in a way, that also has influence on this whole discussion. And that's a part of the discussion that is often overlooked. And this is not to take sides either way, because the psychological aspect of it has very little to do with morality, at least at the very basics. The morality comes in at a later stage. Tonight, I just want to talk about what makes us, as humans, so scared of fellow humans who are different from us. Why are we so scared of differences? Because, make no mistakes, every one of us discriminates. Every one of us makes a segregation, even if it's a fraction, even if it's something that you gloss over or correct. for yourself? Well, we all, at a very basic level, make the distinction between us and someone else. And there's a very basic biological reason why we make that distinction. It's only when distinction gives rise to discrimination, shutting others out based on that distinction, that's when it becomes a problem. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. If you want to join in, I've got the live on. If you're watching this in replay, enjoy, sit back. And if you have any questions, want to ask something, want to join into the discussion, add it in the comments and I'll get back to you there. So, as always with these lives, I'm wondering that I should have prepared a couple of things, and of course I forgot in the hassle of the day, but I'm sure you can follow. As I just mentioned, there is two different aspects, and these things we need to keep separate. That's going to be a word we hear a lot more too. But there is distinction. So I am 42 years old. My husband is 45. That is not the same age. My son is much younger. He's a teenager. These are distinctions. The distinction between me and my husband is not as large as between me and my son. But there is a distinction. My husband is 3 years older than I am. I am 3 years younger than he. Whether that makes much of a difference? 3 years? Probably not. But with young children, for instance, the difference between a 1-year-old child or a 4-year-old child, that creates a big difference in terms of their development, in terms of their age, in terms of their size, in terms of whether or not they can understand you when you speak to them, these sort of things. But still, these are distinctions. Every person, every being, every human is unique. Unique in the sense that we all have distinctive traits that are common across the board. For instance, I have originally ash blonde hair, which I dye because I don't like the color, but that's an interesting one. Keep that in mind. I'm going grey. A lot of people are going grey, even at my age. A lot of people have ash blonde hair. A lot of people have the same eye color as me. A lot of people have similar past, grew up in a similar situation. I'm an only child. These are all traits that more people have. But it's the unique combination of all these factors that make us into unique human beings. And that means that every human is distinct from one another, if only for the fact that this is my body, your body is your body, and it's only yours. So you are a distinct human being. And I'm a distinct human being. And that distinction is a simple fact. It's a biological fact. It's a physical, physics kind of fact. And that's okay. Of course that's okay, because all of us are different. All of us have unique thoughts and feelings. Sure, everyone falls in love. Almost everyone likes a particular food and hates another kind of food. Again, these are not distinctive traits, but the combination of traits that you have, that's distinctive for you. It also means that there are people who have traits that are similar to yours. They have a lot of similar traits. For example, they all went to the same high school or to the same university, or they all studied in a certain field. They all grew up in a certain culture with certain norms and values. They may even look like you because, well, the way we look, our physiology, is genetics. That's just pure biology. It's not a matter of morals, how you're born. That's the whole point. I was born with light skin because my parents had light skin, and there's no gene anywhere in my gene pool for darker skin. Someone else who does have that gene may or may not have a darker skin. These are biological factors. I'm not telling you anything new there. And so there are individuals that are more like us, in short, who share more of the traits that we have. They never have the exact same traits, but they can come very close. And then there's people who grew up in a completely different country, in a completely different socioeconomic situation, with a different family setup. Perhaps they didn't have both of their parents, or they were their parents were alive, but they were always working, and they were raised by a nanny, or by the village, or by their grandparents. Maybe they had lots and lots of siblings. They speak a different language, they have a different culture, different ancestry. And these are the people who don't share as many traits with you as the people closer to you. And it's in this global day and age, it's no longer a given that the people who are closest to you physically, so who your immediate family, the people in your neighborhood, the people who live in your city, in your country, that they are more likely to share traits with you than people on the other side of the world. We are a global world now. People live all over the place. They come from all over the place. It's no longer strange to see people from different backgrounds, different cultures with a completely different physiology. Much taller, much larger, much smaller, different skin color, different eye color, different languages. It's no longer strange to see people who are very different from you in your immediate community. And that is both, that helps to create a sense of inclusiveness, because if you see a lot of people with different traits, you also see the traits that you do share. You see that maybe your neighbor comes from the Philippines, and he is very different from you in lots of ways, but you have a family, he has a family, children are roughly the same age, you are roughly the same age, perhaps you work in the same field or maybe even in the same company. And here you see that there are traits that you share. And in the traits that you share, you find points to connect. The reason I'm telling you this, because I'm quite sure you already know this, the reason I'm laying this foundation is to explain how our mind, at the very, very basis, perceives the distinctions. Every human is distinct, and our primal brain, our very basic brain, at the literally your brainstem, the base of your brain, that is the primitive brain, the reptilian brain that thinks in yes or no. Something is or is not. And that part of you is only concerned with safety. Your safety. No one else's. Not your kids. Not your partner. Not your neighbors. Nobody friggin' else but you. That is its job, because that is the part of our brain that deals with our survival instinct. And it's that part of the brain that observes and simply says, this person across me, on the trait of eye color, saying yes or no. And even if you don't know your own eye color, because your primitive brain is honestly that primitive, is the eye color similar to what I am used to seeing? Yes, no. Yes? Okay, fine. Hair color, different? Or am I used to that? That's familiar. Check. This is how your primitive brain checks the image of someone you meet, and they check how many similar traits are there. And even if traits are not similar to you, then at least how familiar are you to seeing these traits? So if you grow up in a primarily Caucasian, white Caucasian community, then that is what you're used to. When you grow up in a predominantly colored community, then that is what you're used to. And it doesn't matter what your community is. It doesn't matter whether you grew up up in the high north with the native people of the Nordic regions. It doesn't matter if you grew up in a township. It doesn't matter if you grew up in Australia or in Japan or in China or in India. It doesn't matter where you grew up. The fact that you grew up in a community where you are used to seeing people with a certain physiology. And this is where a very important part of our primary brain kicks in. Safety. And what is safe? How does your primary brain decide if something is safe or not? The very first key issue that it checks: do I know this? Is this familiar? Is this person familiar? That's why you will trust a friend much more easily than you will trust a stranger. Because a stranger is someone you haven't met before. You don't recognize them. Is not familiar, therefore always a little unsafe. If you're in a situation you've never been in before, you're nervous. Why are you nervous? Because you feel a little unsafe. Even if there's no rational reason, because your rational brain works on a completely different level. Even if there's no rational reason for you to be nervous about the situation, it is new, it is unfamiliar, and therefore you will feel nervous. There's that little tiny brain, tiny voice in the back of your head, the reptilian brain saying, I'm not so sure this is safe. I don't trust this. I might want to fight or flee. Because that is ultimately what the decision is. Is this so unsafe that you have to act or not? And you probably can see where this is going. So if something that you're familiar with is deemed safe, and you can't help this, what your reptilian brain does is hardwired. You have very little control. You can correct what your reptilian brain does and spouts. We'll get to that later. You can correct it. You can have influence on it, but you cannot change your reptilian brain's mind, so to speak. So if your reptilian brain says, if it's familiar, it's safe. And if it's safe, that means that you can just lie back and be okay with everything. And your social brain and your rational brain can go on and do whatever they want, because the reptilian brain will only kick in when there's danger. If there's no danger, have fun, go ahead. So, if it's familiar, it's safe. If it's safe, You don't have to act. You don't have to fight or flee. But when you meet someone that doesn't tick as many boxes of, yeah, this is familiar, this is something I know, your reptilian brain will be alert. This is not something you can help. This is your survival instinct. You can't switch off your survival instinct. Honestly, you can't. There is no way. And you shouldn't want to, because if your survival instinct shuts off, then you'd have no reason to, well, you wouldn't function. You literally wouldn't function. Everything would just stop. The primitive brain is also your connection to your body. So you need that. You need that survival instinct. And when that instinct says, this is unfamiliar, I'm not used to seeing that eye color. Hey, this person has pink hair? I've never seen that. Wait, and what are those clothes? Because all of a sudden, when there's several boxes of, I don't know this, that's when your primary brain, your reptilian brain, starts getting picky. And that's when it starts picking on all the details that it didn't notice before. Because if it's familiar, your reptilian brain just continues to lay like the crocodile it is out in the sun and enjoy the sunbeams at the side of the river and be content and be fine and not mind anything very much. But when there's reason to be alert, your brain starts automatically, you don't do this consciously, but subconsciously you automatically start taking note of other details as well. When you see someone who has a skin color you're familiar to see, hair color you're familiar to see, general outline that's familiar. For example, when you work in the inner city and there's a lot of business people around, you were used to the kind of haircut that businessmen have. You're used to seeing men dressed in suits, to a point where the complete image is so familiar that you do not pay attention to it. Only to the point of, do I know this person? No, I've never met them before. Oh, well, what's the color of his tie? Wait, those shoes with those socks? No, that doesn't work. Then you start paying attention. So, the more familiar someone looks, the more they look like the majority of what you're used to seeing, the more likely you'll be okay with it and you won't even think twice. But the moment someone looks different from what you're used to seeing, that's when your reptilian brain turns on and starts nitpicking. And then anything can be a reason to conclude this person is unsafe. Are they? They're perfectly safe. They're just not familiar. And your reptilian brain doesn't know the difference. The part of your brain that does know the difference, and this is where I'm going to see if I can bring out because the ship is typically the way I explain it. And that reptilian brain is your deckhand. But I'm going to show you the brains first. Yep. Simple brains. As you can see in red, that's the reptilian brain. That's that core part of you that is all about fight or flight, and that checks whether or not you're safe. The yellow part, the animal brain, is a bit more evolved, and that's our social brain. That's the one that, the part of our brain that's about the more complex emotions. It's the happy, creative part of us, and it's our drive. And this is also the part of us that wants to be social, the part of us that is curious about things that are different. So, where your reptilian brain says, I don't know that, I'm not doing that, not going near that. Your emotional brain is the one that says, hey, that's interesting, I've never seen that before. Wow, I like what you've done with your hair. What is that? How do you do that? Tell me more. Now, the emotional brain, while genuinely curious, is not very good at picking words. So, in their curiosity, in your enthusiasm, you may ask questions that are actually hurtful and impertinent. Often that's not intentional, but it happens. And it doesn't come from a bad place. Because simply the emotional brain does not have command of language. It can in basic, but think of, in terms of a child, think of an 8-year-old child. They have to, they know their way around words and they can describe things, but they don't know all the words and they don't know what they mean. They're not very good at it yet. Because the part of our brains that's all about language and phrasing things correctly and making sure that you make the correct analysis and assumptions and not the wrong assumptions, the right kind of assumptions. Because there is a difference, and that difference, your rational brain is the one that can tell you that. And that's the part of our brain that thinks in abstracts. And when it comes to dealing with people who, and we're still going for looks right now, that people that look unfamiliar, your reptilian brain is the one that says, Yunk! I don't know what that is. I don't trust that. Are we still safe? And it's your emotional brain that's, hey, I've never seen that before. That's interesting. But curiosity will only win when you feel safe enough to do so. And your rational brain helps that process by analyzing the threats and the unfamiliar things that your reptilian brain has spotted. Your rational brain will analyze them, check them off as, okay, it's unfamiliar but not a threat. Unfamiliar but not a threat. Okay, reptilian brain, calm down. It's okay. It's new and it's okay to stay alert, but it's safe. And then when your reptilian brain accepts that answer, that's when the enthusiasm comes out. And then differences become fun and differences become a reason to learn. And your rational brain will also be interesting. And wait, we have one brain, right? Yes, it is one brain, but 3 parts of our brains, and they each think very differently. That's why I usually talk about the ship, about the reptilian deckhand, the instinctive deckhand, the emotional, social, outgoing or terrified first mate, and the rational, calculating captain. You need all 3. They are all 3 on the ship, and the ship, that's you, that's your body, that's all of you. They are all there, but you need all 3 of them to work through life, just, sail through the storms and across the cliffs and shoals and find all the different things that happens on life's ocean. But they have a very different way of looking at the world. And where the distinction, the biological distinctions and the physical distinctions between one person and another become discrimination, that happens when the reptilian brain, the deckhand, the instinctive deckhand, who's all about fight or flight, is this safe or not? When they are not convinced that this unfamiliar situation or this unfamiliar person, that this is safe. Someone who has been in unsafe situations a lot has a more active deckhand. Their reptilian brain is more active. They are more likely to be triggered into a fight or flight situation. Someone who feels safe in and with themselves, who does not have this extensive experience with being unsafe is much more likely to say, hey, okay, this is new, but new isn't bad. Let's see, let's give it a shot. But the reason why people feel unsafe, that varies a lot. Rich people have all the money in the world, it seems. They also, in their mind, have a lot to lose. And that means that anyone that they don't know can potentially be a threat to them. Poor people have nothing to lose, but what they have is extremely dear to them. Usually the reason that people end up at the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder, to put it nicely, is because they live in shitty situations. They already didn't start out with a silver spoon in their mouth, and it didn't get any better from there. Working conditions, having to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make a living, to feed your family. These are extremely unsafe situations. You feel constantly threatened. So anyone who comes across into that world who's different, that will spark resistance. Because when people are already on high alert, and in this day and age, a lot of people are, because we are with so many people, so many differences, it becomes hard to keep track of things. Life, social media, what the government wants. We have the pandemic, we have the economic situation, we have a world war going on. We have so many things, so many crisis upon crisis upon crisis. So yes, everyone's deckhand, everyone's primitive brain is on high alert and is nitpicking. Yeah, but you're different. And then it no longer stops with just what you can see, just what the deckhand can perceive. Because the deckhand, being a here and now mindset, is only about what you can observe about someone. So racism, gender discrimination, age discrimination, that very often starts at the very base, starts at that primitive brain, because that's something you can see, something you understand from a biological point of view. This person is different from me. This person is different from what I'm used to. But when you feel so fundamentally unsafe, the other 2 brains are likely to follow your primitive brain rather than to correct it. So instead of, for example, your rational captain saying, yeah, this person is different, but it's safe. It's okay, calm down, it's safe, we're safe, it's all going to be fine. Instead of that, the captain says, okay, you say this person, the situation is unsafe, let me check all the reasons why. And the captain can see so much more than the deckhand. So this person didn't go to the right school, didn't have the right qualifications, doesn't know the right people, doesn't have the and not the right is not familiar, not something that I have established as being safe. So they don't have the education that I know makes them safe. They don't have the people that they know. They don't have the skills that they know. They have a background, and there is so much different about this person. It cannot be reconciled. And when both the deckhand and the captain, and they're both very straightforward, very logical to a fault in their approach, to a point where it's no longer logical because they see things that aren't there. But when they've decided this isn't safe, that is where your social brain, your social first mate, who's typically outgoing and enthusiastic and wants to connect with people and wants to talk and wants to ask questions and is interested, that part suddenly has two voices saying unsafe, unsafe. And your first mate shuts down. But the first mate, that animal brain, that is the part of you that empathizes. That is the part of you that can overcome the differences, can bridge the differences between you and the other person. And when that shuts down, when the first mate shuts down and doesn't want to be involved, that's also your moral compass. Your first mate is also your moral compass, and that no longer speaks up. So what you're left with is your deckhand saying, this is unsafe. I want to flee. Push that person away. Get it off me. Calling slurs is a way to create a distance between you and the other person. So calling slurs, walking away, but not confronting. Never confronting, because fleeing is not about confronting. That is one response. Or the deckhand might say, no, I want to fight. That is so dangerous. I want it gone. I want it gone. Your first mate doesn't know any of this. So your primitive brain is shouting to get this danger, this perceived danger, perceived unsafety, out of the way, out of the way. Your first mate no longer is outgoing, so you don't have empathy to connect with the other person, because that is being overshadowed by the deckhand on one hand and your rational brain, your rational captain, justifying what the deckhand is saying. And that is the point where you get outrageous kinds of discrimination, where you get the real slur calling, where you get literally the lynching mobs. That's when it gets completely out of hand. And it all comes down to safety. Do I feel safe with this person across me who may be very different from me? It can also be more subtle, where your deckhand isn't shouting so much about this is unsafe and I want that person gone, because the captain is stronger, or the first mate says, no, you can't do that. Whatever you do, you can't openly attack them, you can't openly call them that. Shut up. And then the captain will find ways to give pinpricks, make the nasty remarks, to make sure that this person who is so different gets excluded one way or another. They will give their comeuppance, because the captain has patience. Primitive deckhand does not have patience. Captain has patience. But still, it's those two who are doing the talking. And neither the deckhand nor the captain, rational as he is, the captain has no idea of how emotions work, has no interest in keeping another crew safe. No, that's the first mate. And the first mate is being overshadowed by both of them. So, in summary, what happens here? So first of all, we all are distinct people. We all have distinctive traits. And that means that when you meet someone, they will have traits that you share and they will have traits that you don't share. And when the traits that you don't share outweigh the traits that you do share, that's when you start to feel unsafe. And that is the point where you go, can I trust this person? You are different from me. How different? Too different, or a good kind of different? And this happens subconsciously. While that dialogue is going on, that's a good thing, because that's your first mate. Your first mate's trying to assess, okay, but this is also a fellow human being. This is also a person who has these, and these traits in common with me. So how different are they? And are they so different that I can't trust them, or is it safe to trust them? And you will notice this when you come across someone that you know rationally and emotionally this person is safe to talk to, but you still feel something gnawing typically somewhere in your stomach, somewhere in your abdomen, or in the back of your head. You feel something gnawing that says, yeah, but they're different. Am I sure? That feeling, it's unpleasant, and it reminds you that you're very human. But in this day and age, it's also morally reprehensive considered to have that little voice, to have your deckhand question, are we sure? You guys, they're standing on deck, and the captain and the first mate are making contact with that new ship, and the deckhands, they're like, yeah, but they're different. They don't have masts like we do. They don't have sails. They've got chimneys and an engine. It's different. They're different colour. You sure about this? And the other two are like, yeah, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's fine. And it is fine. And you interact with these people, and it's no problem. But you do feel that they are different in a way that you're not used to. And the more often that you meet that person and people like them, the more their traits that were first unfamiliar will now become familiar. And then your deckhand's like, oh yeah, I know that. That's okay. That's safe. I'm not needed here. Wake me up when you do. And that's when that little gnawing voice goes away. So making that distinction and assessing whether or not you're safe with someone who's very different from you, that is a perfectly normal psychological process. It becomes a problem when the feeling of unsafety starts to overrule and dominate the internal conversation within your crew. If the deckhand takes over, convinces the captain to find all the reasons why your deckhand is right not to trust that person, that's a cognitive bias. And your first mate is no longer part of the conversation because they're being overshouted. And well, when both of them say that it's unsafe, your first mate's not going to make the call and say, oh, screw that. Of course they're safe. Shut up. Because your first mate's outvoted. And that is the point where making that distinction, which is a natural process, a normal process, can become discrimination. All the way from, I'm not going to sit with them for coffee because, I know that they're fellow students and I know that, they're nice. But no, I don't feel comfortable. From there, all the way to lynching mobs. And actual violence and the slurs, and often not just one person, because the deckhand who wants to, convinces your captain to come up with these arguments, they also seek other deckhands who feel the same way. And that's why people who are angry all the time, the angry people, these are all deckhands who have rallied their own crew behind whatever it is that the deckhand has decided is safe or unsafe. And they will find other crews, other people who are of the same mind. Because again, that is a mindset that they know. So that's why discrimination also happens on basis of ideology, of religion, not just religious practices, but actual beliefs. Not because one belief is better than the other. They don't honestly believe that. No, it's all about, do I know this? Am I familiar with this? When you've grown up in a Catholic community, that's what you know. To then be introduced to someone who is Hindu is so very different that takes some time to work out the differences and work out the similarities. Because ultimately, the only thing that helps to stop any kind of discrimination, and there has been multiple studies on this, there have been multiple examples of people who have put this into practice. And like I said, I should have prepared and found a couple of them for you. But you will find stories, and you will find stories on the net of people who deliberately made the effort to bridge the differences, to find the similarities and put more weight on the similarities than on the differences. Because the similarities are familiar. Because what you have in common with the other person, no matter how different the other person is, what you have in common is every bit as strong as where you differ. So overcoming the bias towards people who are different from you within yourself, but also within your community, it's about stressing and deliberately choosing to look at the similarities. And that takes effort, because you're going well and truly against your primitive instinct, your basic instinct that says, if it's familiar, it's safe, and I can disregard that. I can ignore that because it's safe. It doesn't register. But the difference is that is unsafe, and that I have to notice, that I have to pay attention to. So your deckhand is clamoring to pay attention to the differences and to then say, okay, these differences, they exist. This person does have a different skin color. This person does have a different background. This person does have a different ideology. This person does have a different religion. These differences exist. Thank you for sharing. But now, and this is where your first mate takes the lead, let's find the similarities. Because they also have 2 children, just like I do. They also have a dog for a pet. Oh, and it's a similar dog too. Oh, that is fun. They go to the same community center. They go shopping on Saturday. Even little things like that. If going shopping on a Saturday is a staple for you, something that you're familiar with, a little of a tradition, then someone can be completely different, but that is a similarity that you have. They drive the same kind of car, or they like the same kind of music. They love my favorite show. It's the similarities that brings us together. It's the similarities that overcome the differences, but that has to be a conscious choice. Your natural instinct, no matter how open-minded you are, no matter how much of an advocate for equality you are, your basic instinct is hardwired to notice the differences before the similarities. And in fact, to notice the differences, highlight the differences, and downplay the similarities, because that's safe. You don't have to pay attention to that. So to shift that focus, that takes conscious effort on your own part. And you will find that this too, the more you focus on similarities, the more often you make that effort, making that effort becomes familiar in itself. And your deckhand will stop fighting it. Because, oh, yeah, right. Oh, yeah, but differences. Oh, yeah, no, that's right. You want to go for the similarities. Okay, you go find the similarities first and you know, yeah, well, you always find similarities and that's fine. You know what? Yeah, never mind. I don't, yeah, it's okay. And bit by bit, your deckhand learns to not rally, not to take arms against a sea of differences, but to let them be. And then it becomes familiar to be open-minded. And that is how you truly overcome discrimination within yourself, but also within your community. Encourage people to see to acknowledge the differences, because you cannot ignore them. It's unfair to ignore the differences, because differences also make people interesting. Because, yeah, they're different from you. You can learn from each other. There is beauty in the differences between people. And to not acknowledge that would be a pity. But there's a difference between acknowledging the simple fact that this person has different traits from you, and highlighting and focusing on those differences as a source of danger. So acknowledge the differences and embrace the similarities. Go find the similarities. Go see what you have in common with one another. And typically, you'll find that the more time you spend with someone, the more similarities you will see. And it's also, the more time you spend with someone, the more familiar they become. And that's why sometimes it's always amazed me for a long time. That's one of the reasons why I dove into this. That when I grew up in a predominantly white Caucasian community, and I had a friend in college. She was colored, the only colored girl in class, and I was perfectly okay with that. That I had no problem whatsoever. But even at that time, when I was friends with her, we've since grown apart, but even at that time, if I saw someone unfamiliar, I noticed that a stranger who was Caucasian, like myself and like most people I saw, felt less of a threat than a stranger who was a person of color. And that was not a nice thing to notice about myself. When I felt that, when I noticed that, and I noticed that it was something that is, I wasn't taught this. That's the thing. Yes, discrimination is taught in the sense that discriminating is taught. So how you handle these differences between people, that's taught. But noticing the differences and noticing that you feel less at ease, less comfortable with someone who is different from you than someone who is similar to you, that is biological. That's a primary psychological situation, primary psychological process, ultimately geared towards survival, because if it's familiar, it's safe. Primitive as the reptilian brain is, it doesn't make this distinction that something can be unfamiliar and still be safe. It doesn't do that. It's not something you can teach your primitive brain, but it's something you can teach the other brains. The same as you can teach discrimination, you can teach to find inclusion, to embrace people, embrace differences. That too can be learned. And it's not nice to notice about yourself that even when you are part of a community, I'm queer, that is, I'm non-binary, and in a sense, I think the easiest way would be to describe is bisexual. It's a term most people know. So I'm not standard heterosexual. I'm not cis female. I was born with a female body, but I don't particularly feel like a woman or a man. A bit of both, a bit of neither. I'm still working that out, actually. But as I was struggling, before I came out about this, when I was struggling to find my own way in that, I knew I was queer. And still, when I'd meet someone who was gay, I'd have that uncomfortable feeling. And it made no sense because they're queer, I'm queer. We have enough in common, right? So why? Well, I wasn't certain of what exactly my own queerness was. So I had no way of knowing whether my queer was the same as their queer. So, yeah, they're different. How much different? Yeah, I think you're safe. Rational brain, emotional brain says, no, it's perfectly safe. There's nothing wrong with that. Stop acting weird. They're like us. I'm not sure. I don't know, says the deckhand. Even with someone who is different from mainstream community in the same way that you are. And that is also where a very important part of, and this is actually a much larger theme that deserves much more attention. But when you feel secure with yourself, feel secure with who you are, then it doesn't matter anymore how different the person across you is. Because you feel safe in and with yourself. Not based on, I'm okay with being white, or I'm okay with being Catholic, or I'm okay with being male, female. Doesn't matter. That's still a deckhand resisting. That's a deckhand trying to convince themselves that they are safe with themselves. No, I have to be safe with myself because I'm not safe anywhere else. Yeah, that's not the kind of security that will help you embrace others. That's actually the very definition of insecurity. Only when you feel safe with yourself, with who you are, even if you don't know 100% who and what that is. But you are you. And when you feel okay with who you are, that's when you're okay with the people around you, no matter how different they are from you. Simply because when you feel safe and secure with yourself, the other person's differences no longer pose a threat. And your deckhand doesn't look at the other ship and say, but they have an engine and chimneys and we have masts and that's different and that's scary. No. Then your deckhand's just standing, leaning on the bulwark going, oh, chimneys. Guess they have an engine. We don't, we have a mast. And there is no judgment in that. To be free of judgment is to no longer need to define what is better than something else, what is stronger, what is more important than something else. And that feeling, that deep, deep security, that comes from being secure with yourself. And ultimately, that's where you will find true equality. until then, until you find that kind of safety in yourself, make the conscious effort to see the similarities. Anytime you feel any part of you, however remote, go when you meet someone new who's different than you, make a conscious effort to note the similarities. And if nothing else, what you have in common is that you are both humans. And even for those of us who believe in aliens and lizard people, even if someone is not human, what they still have in common with you is that they are alive, right here, right now, in this particular moment, and they're sharing the same space with you. If nothing else, the person across you shares that. So there are always similarities. No matter how many differences, there is always similarities. Focus on that, embrace those, make the effort to highlight the similarities, and encourage the people around you to do the same. That is person by person, situation by situation, how we can change the world, and how we can truly, firmly, and find a lasting form of equality as humans among each other. Exactly 1 hour. I do not time these, but this is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for sharing this. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any comments, leave them in the video below, or find me on the website. On the channel you will find my website. Send me an email, send me a comment. I love to hear from you. For now, thank you very much, and see you again in 2 weeks for the next one. Goodbye.